In 1940, Great Britain was staring down the barrel of Gan. The Luftwaffe was hammering London, and the Royal Air Force was running out of fighter planes. Desperate, the British went to a relatively unknown American company called North American Aviation and asked them a simple question. Can you build us some P-40s? The president of North American Aviation essentially said, no, but give us 120 days and we will build you something better. What they built was a complete aerodynamic masterpiece. It had a revolutionary wing. It had a fuselage so smooth it looked like it was carved out of ice. There was just one massive, glaring problem. The engine was garbage. Above 14,000 feet, the brand-new American fighter choked. Its Allison V-12 engine ran out of breath in the thin air, meaning if it went up against the deadly German Messerschmitt 109s or Focke-Wulf 190s, it would be slaughtered. But then, someone in a British hangar suggested a completely insane idea. What if we rip the American engine out and bolt a British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine onto the front? That single heart transplant didn't just fix the plane. It created a mathematical glitch in the sky. It created the P-51 Mustang, the aircraft that broke the back of the German Luftwaffe, escorted the bombers to Berlin, and forced Hermann Göring to admit that the war was lost. This is the story of how an accidental hybrid became the greatest fighter plane of World War II. To understand why the Mustang was a freak of engineering, you have to look at the wings. Before the P-51, planes like the legendary Supermarine Spitfire used a traditional wing design. If you look at a Spitfire wing from the side, the thickest, widest part of the wing is right near the front. This is great for generating lift and turning tightly, but it creates a massive, invisible wall of air resistance. It's like dragging a parachute behind you. The engineers at North American Aviation tried something entirely new, the Laminar Flow Wing. They moved the thickest part of the wing perfectly to the middle. This delayed the disruption of the air, allowing the wind to slide over the wing like water over a wet stone. Suddenly, aerodynamic drag essentially vanished. But they didn't stop there. Drag is the enemy of speed, so they became obsessed. They realized that the tiny, rounded heads of the metal rivets holding the plane together were catching the wind. So, they puttied over the rivets and sanded the entire plane completely flush. That simple change added 15 miles per hour to the top speed. Then, there was the radiator. Under the belly of the Mustang sits a massive air scoop. Usually, a radiator is a giant air brake, but the Mustang used the Meredith effect. The air entered the scoop, was superheated by the engine coolant, expanded, and was blasted out a narrow flap at the back. The radiator wasn't slowing the plane down, it was acting like a primitive jet engine, actually pushing the plane forward. The aerodynamics were perfect. But without a high-altitude engine, it was a Ferrari with a lawnmower motor. When the British test pilots at Duxford ripped out the Allison engine and bolted on the supercharged Rolls-Royce Merlin V12, the math absolutely broke. Because the Mustang had almost zero aerodynamic drag, when you gave it the 1,500 horsepower of a Merlin engine, it didn't just fly, it teleported. The P-51 was suddenly 20 to 30 miles per hour faster than the Spitfire, using the exact same engine. It could now fly at 440 miles per hour. It could comfortably fight at 35,000 feet, right in the territory of the deadly German interceptors. But the real outlier statistic wasn't just speed, it was distance. By 1943, the American 8th Air Force was suffering a bloodbath. They were sending massive formations of B-17 flying fortresses to bomb Germany in broad daylight. The generals believed the bombers had enough machine guns to defend themselves. They were catastrophically wrong. 30,000 young American airmen were killed. The bombers had fighter escorts, the massive, heavily armed P-47 Thunderbolts, but the P-47 guzzled fuel. When the bomber formations reached the German border, the P-47s would hit bingo fuel. The pilots had to turn around and fly home, leaving the slow bombers completely unprotected. The German fighters would literally wait just outside the P-47's range and then swarm the bombers like sharks. Then, the P-51 Mustang arrived. Because of that ultra-slick laminar flow wing, the Mustang barely burned any fuel while cruising. Engineers stuffed fuel tanks into the wings. They stuffed a massive tank right behind the pilot's seat. And then, they strapped massive disposable drop tanks made out of compressed paper under the wings. Suddenly, the fighter escort didn't have to turn around at the border. When the Luftwaffe swarmed the bombers over Berlin, they expected to find them alone. Instead, they found swarms of P-51 Mustangs. When the combat started, the Mustangs would simply drop their empty paper fuel tanks, push the throttles to the firewall, and unleash hell with 6.50 caliber machine guns. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, later said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." The Mustang wasn't just a deadly weapon. It was a psychological relief for the pilots. If you crammed a pilot into a German Bf 109, their shoulders touched the glass. They couldn't move. After a 3-hour flight, they had to be pulled out of the cockpit like stiff boards. The Mustang, especially the definitive P-51D model, was spacious. It was heated. It had a massive unobstructed bubble canopy that gave the pilot 360 degrees of visibility. In a dogfight, losing sight of the enemy for 1 second means you die. The bubble canopy was a literal lifesaver. One veteran pilot who flew the Spitfire, the P-47, and the P-38 described the Mustang simply, "It wasn't quite as nimble as a Spitfire, but it was luxurious. It was the American Spitfire." It was a plane that let a pilot fly for 6 hours, fight a grueling dogfight over Germany, and still have the energy to fly down to the deck on the way home to shoot up German trains, barges, and staff cars. It was so fast in a dive that pilots reported outdiving everything in the sky. If a German tried to dive away to escape, the Mustang would simply push the nose down, gather an apocalyptic amount of speed, and run them down. The story of the P-51 Mustang is the ultimate story of wartime improvisation. It wasn't planned years in advance. It wasn't the result of a massive billion-dollar government program. It was born because the British were desperate. The Americans were arrogant enough to build a new plane in 120 days, and someone had the crazy idea to marry an American airframe to a British engine. Today, if you have the millions of dollars required to buy one of the surviving Mustangs on the civilian market, you are buying the ultimate hot rod. You are buying a 1,700 horsepower V12 monster that can cruise at 400 miles per hour. But more than that, you are buying the machine that won the air war. The plane that arrived just in time to save the bombers, break the Luftwaffe, and prove that sometimes the greatest weapons in history are built entirely by accident. If the story of the Laminar Flow glitch changed how you see World War II aviation, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that real, unpolished engineering history deserves to be heard. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the archives. What do you think? Was the P-51 Mustang the greatest fighter of the war? Or does the Supermarine Spitfire still hold the crown? Let us know in the comments below.